Thank you. I want to ask Admiral and General, each of you, about this issue of technological superiority. I mentioned Undersecretary Kendall has testified that our technological superiority that we have enjoyed for years is eroding, and we've had many other witnesses support that. There are a variety of factors that have played into it, what we've done to ourselves with budget cuts, a procurement process that cannot keep up with changes in technology, the fact that some of our competitors have stolen incredible amounts of information from us and benefited from it. I mean, all of these things and probably others contribute to it. But each of you are responsible for dealing with the world today as we find it and being prepared with plans and contingencies and using the forces that we have today. So I would be interested as a combatant commander, as a commander responsible for a key area of the world, are you concerned about these trends in technology and our ability to keep up? Are there some areas that concern you more than others, given your area of responsibility? And are there suggestions you have about how we, the United States, could and should adjust to meet these changes? Kind of a broad picture of what it's like from your end as warfighting commanders. Admiral?
Well, thank you, sir. Over my career, my observation is that when we were dealing with the Soviet Union in the Cold War, that we had a concerted effort as a military to have that technological edge that really provided a great, tremendous amount of benefit and allowed us to prevail, I think, during that time. As we entered the last part of this past century and we started efforts in the Middle East, we predominantly were dealing with wars and events that where we had such a large technological superiority that we had air dominance, we had undersea dominance, we had dominance in every area, and that was good, I think, and we used that dominance. But during that time, I think that our priorities for watching what the rest of the world was doing as countries came along that had the ability and the desire to want to improve their militaries and improve their technological capabilities, that we kind of took a little bit of a break and didn't make the types of investments that we need to make. So during that time, our relative superiority, I think, has declined and continues to decline. Some of the reasons for that, I think, are because countries have more money to spend. There's a greater proliferation of technology. Some of it has been stolen through intellectual property. Some of it has been sold around the world in different venues that you're all aware of. The other thing that makes it challenging for us is our general vulnerability. I mean, when it comes to the Asia Pacific, we're a Pacific nation, but we're also an island nation. So we rely very heavily on power projection, which means we have to be able to get forces forward, to sustain them forward, and we rely heavily on systems that several decades ago weren't even known about or thought about too much, and that really exists now in the cyber world and the space world, which unveils, if we're not careful, will unveil vulnerabilities that we have to face with technological advancements. To the degree of how we address these, what's important for me is making sure that the forces we have, number one, are dominant. You never want to go into any crisis or even in deterrence to try to manage a situation where the force is not dominant. It needs to be technologically superior across multiple domains. So if you start at the top and you go from space to cyber to air to integrated air and missile defense to sea, maritime, to subsurface maritime, there's technological challenges as all the militaries of the world get better in these domains that we must continue to pace for us to be able to be relevant in the domains that allow us to project U.S. power in defense of U.S. interest. Now, in the build-up to this presidential budget submission, I made it clear through a series of processes in the Pentagon the types of key areas where we need to maintain our focus on technological advancement. And I think most of those were were accurately represented in Secretary Kendall's testimony. And I think that if the President's budget is supported in those areas, that it will continue to get at the types of technological advances that are critical for us to stay forward and just to protect U.S. interests in the Asia Pacific.
Mr. Chairman, I would echo what Admiral Locklear had to say, particularly on the peninsula. You discussed earlier the asymmetric capabilities are being developed by North Korea. Really, as they develop those asymmetric capabilities, they're specifically orienting on what they consider to be some of our vulnerabilities, and through their development, they're trying to close our dominance, basically. And so we have to continue to develop our capabilities, to change our posture, our concepts, our employment, in order to ensure that we maintain dominance. The last thing I would say in a peninsula is because we're operating on a peninsula, it's a relatively small theater. Air and naval dominance is very important to the agility that I have on the peninsula itself if we have a crisis. So all of those things are things that I think about quite often. And finally, the specific asymmetric capabilities that I think about the most is the ballistic missile capability North Korea possesses and our continued ability to be able to counter that. And then finally, an ISR. Many of our adversaries are becoming more proficient in determining how to work inside of our capabilities, our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, and also how to use deception and other means in order to limit that advantage that we have today.
Seems to me in no area of the world is it more true that a loss of technological superiority means increased risk to American lives than on the Korean Peninsula. And so I think that's another way to keep in mind. Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again for your testimonies. I represent the largest Vietnamese population outside of Vietnam in the world, sitting right there in Orange County, California. As I said, we've always had our view to what's going out in the Asian countries and the Pacific region. And last year, Vietnam and the United States agreed to ease its lethal weapons embargo on Vietnam in order to improve the maritime security and to address the ongoing conflicts in regards to the islands and the East Sea. But on the other hand, I've worked enough on the Vietnamese issues to understand that Vietnam still is lacking so much with respect to its human rights issues. In particular, in 2000, when I went with President Clinton for the bilateral trade agreement, and then later when we took Vietnam off of the countries of particular concern list with respect to religious infractions in order for them to be able to go into the World Trade Organization. So we continue to see that things don't get better with respect to the human rights issues, or marginally at times, and then worse. So can you address for me the roadmap for weapons sales to Vietnam, and what types of lethal weapons would be precluded if Vietnam continues on its road of not changing its human rights record, even with respect to example for Human Rights Watch and our own State Department. They're consistently marked very, very low with respect to human rights. So what do you see, or what can we expect from this administration and this Pentagon with respect to weapon sales to Vietnam? And are we going to tie any conditions to lifting that embargo?
Congresswoman Sanchez, thank you very much for that question. We are still in the process now of working with the Department of State, our colleagues there, to work through how best to leverage the partial lifting of the lethal weapons ban. But certainly a part of those consultations is looking at the human rights picture in Vietnam, and we are very much, even as we in the Department of Defense are very interested in deepening our relationship with Vietnam, we also are committed to pushing for greater progress on the human rights front. So that is something that we're very much taking into account as we look at how best to work with Vietnam. I think it's fair to say that, broadly speaking, the kinds of capabilities that we think that would be most useful for Vietnam in terms of its security needs are those that are would be helpful to them in terms of maritime security, in terms of maritime domain awareness, in terms of helping them strengthen their ability to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So those are the kinds of areas that we're focused on with them and looking at what kinds of arms might be relevant to that. But we're still in the process of figuring out how best to approach specific items they might be interested in.
And, Madam Secretary, we've also seen obviously a pretty aggressive stance by China with respect to territorial rights or claimed territorial rights in the East Sea. What types of help could we give to Vietnam to ensure its sovereignty over the islands that it believes are part of their integral country?
Well, I think first, as you know, we don't take a position on the territorial claims, but we are very much committed to wanting to see countries in the region work through diplomacy to try to resolve those territorial disputes. So we're focused on encouraging all of the countries to seek peaceful means for resolution and to use diplomacy and use available mechanisms. At the same time, I think helping countries in the region like Vietnam, but other countries as well, strengthen again their own maritime security capabilities and their own maritime domain awareness capabilities is helpful to them in terms of them being able to, again, maintain some visibility over their territorial waters, for example. And I don't know whether Admiral Locklear would want to add on that.
And might you also explain to me the timeline or how we could work together to ensure that this partial release of the weapons ban is not detrimental with respect in particular to our, I believe, what should be, and it is for me at least, requirement that we see better human rights from Vietnam. What is the process in which you're going through to take a look and figure out how we will help militarily?
First and foremost, we're working with the State Department, again, I think, to try to make sure that we have agreement on what are the basic policy parameters for how we would approach how best to leverage the partial lifting of the ban. We are then in consultations with Vietnam about what their needs are. So the State Department really has the lead on talking with them about human rights and the importance of making progress in that area. We reinforce that message. But we have a process internal to our government to sort of lay out our basic parameters, and then we have an ongoing dialogue with Vietnam about what their needs are. And that's a very active dialogue. My Assistant Secretary for Asia-Pacific Affairs is actually a former ambassador to Vietnam, so we have a very active conversation with them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I want to, Madam Secretary, I took down some notes of what you had said in your prepared remarks and also what you said today. We urge the Chinese actions that concern us. We bring this to the Chinese attention. I am one of the individuals in the Congress that for years have been speaking out publicly back in my district, the 3rd District of North Carolina, about the growing debt of our nation, because I believe sincerely that is the biggest threat to our national security, is the growing debt. Admiral, that's why we passed the bill. I did not vote for it, to be honest about it, the sequestration. And then I see we continue to play a shell game with the budget and with the American people's money and find ways to continue to pump up the needs for our military. I believe in honesty in budgeting. I don't believe in dishonesty, but anyway, in budgeting, but I'm for honesty in budgeting. This is my question to you. I have long thought, maybe it's because I was raised in eastern North Carolina, that if you owe someone money and you can't pay them back
they just don't have the same respect for you. And I look at the fact that President Bush raised the debt ceiling 7 out of 8 years that he was the president. Mr. Obama has raised the debt ceiling 7 out of 6 years that he's been the president. And you know, when we raise the debt ceiling, what we're saying to the world is we can't pay our bills, that we have to sell our financial instruments and somehow finance our debt. Okay, the Chinese buy a lot of our debt. So I really would like to know when our representatives of our government, whether they be military or non-military, are sitting there facing the Chinese, if it is a respect because we continue to have to borrow money from the Chinese to pay our bills. And they see all the news articles of how we are spending billions and billions in Afghanistan, that much of it, according to John Sopko, is wasted. And yet we are taking the billions and billions that we're spending overseas that's wasted, taken away from building our military, which needs to be rebuilt. And I get to a point that I just don't understand an administration, and I would say this if it was a Republican administration, how in the world can we continue to play this game of spending, 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 and borrow, and then we think we got equal placement to talk to the Chinese about we are concerned about this and we urge you to do that. Do they really listen to us?
Congressman, I certainly agree that, as I said in my opening remarks, the foundation of our vitality as a country is a strong economy, and that underpins our ability to have a strong military. And again, I think that's one of the reasons why we in the Defense Department have been expressing our support for important agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for example. I think China, again, you know, we have a very interdependent global economy at this point, and we're very important customers for China, as are many other countries around the world. So I think having a robust and growing economy in the United States is important, and the Chinese see the value of that for them. We have, and I also think they recognize very much that even as they modernize their military, the United States military remains the premier military force in the world, and that in addition to our very strong technological track record, we also have an operational track record that is unmatched. I mean, our military's combat experience is unmatched by almost any country in the world, and it's been honed over the last more than 10 years. And I think China very much respects that as we talk to them about our concerns.
Well, I also found it very interesting that you mentioned Trade Promotion Authority in your comments. There are many of us who believe sincerely that any president, Democrat or Republican, if you give them trade promotion authority, then you are damaging our constitutional ability to maintain fairness in trade. So, but thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony today. In particular, Admiral Locklear, I want to thank you for your leadership at PACOM for the last 3 years. I thank you for your service, and I wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors. If I could start with you, Admiral, you mentioned China's aggressive shipbuilding program in addition to their significant advances in electronic warfare capabilities, Admiral. How do our forces in PACOM compare in those aspects, and where do you believe improvements need to be made besides a continued and sustained investment in the U.S. nuclear submarine force, as you mentioned? I'm particularly, concerned and interested. I think that the Chinese at this point have confidence that they could potentially turn the lights off on our use of cyber capabilities on our fleet, our ability to respond both figuratively and literally. And so I want to know what your views are and how we stand.
Well, thank you, sir. It's my assessment that we remain the most dominant military power in the world from all aspects. And I think that there's hardly a country, there's not a country in the world would disagree with that today, even though I think they would recognize that the relative parity of our relative gap between how good we are versus how some of the other forces may be developing is shrinking. In the case of the maritime forces that you've talked about with the PRC, they are on an aggressive strategy and aggressive shipbuilding campaign. They have seem to have limited restrictions on how fast they can produce systems, how fast they can produce ships, submarines, and they're producing what I would consider to be pretty good ships and submarines. But I'd still believe that we remain, and we have the best ships. We have clearly the best ships, the best submarines, the best aircraft carriers, and the best people running in the world. So I'm generally pretty good in that case. But when it comes to dealing day to day in the Asia Pacific, what I require, first of all, we have a forward deployed force that operates with our host nations, Japan, Korea, operates extensively in that region. And that force needs to be ready because it's not only ready for, to day to maintaining the deterrent oversight security of the region, but it's also critical to ensure that we're prepared for a quick reaction if we have to do something in North Korea. So those forces need to be ready. They need to be the best that we have. They need to be of the highest technical capability that we have. And to the degree that we can continue to get good host nation support, which I think we have today, we need to pursue that.
But I want to speak specific to electronic warfare capabilities, if you could, Admiral.
Yeah. In the electronic warfare arena, I think that we are because we've operated in environments, as I said in earlier statements, around the globe where we have a limited denied area through electronic means, I think our electronic warfare capability has diminished, has not kept pace with where we need to be in the future. And we're taking some steps to take a harder look at how we get at electronic warfare. Of course, as you talk about electronic warfare, then it starts to get into the whole cyber issues, which are now being, we're working hard to try to determine how we best defend our cyber assets, how we organize ourselves to do that, how we train a workforce to be able to do that. And that's all part of the President's budget that's come forward that gets at those particular issues.
Good. Well, I share your concern there, Admiral. With regards to North Korea, both you and General Scaparrotti mentioned in your testimonies that their cyber actors continue to conduct cyber actions against South Korean military and civilian networks. How confident are you that this isn't happening to our U.S. forces' Korea infrastructure as well? And additionally, how are we defending ourselves as you mentioned in your testimony, China generating insights into our U.S. security policies, defense networks, logistics, and military capabilities through their cyber program?
Thank you. In regards to Korea and the threat from North Korea, I'm confident of our ability to defend our military networks. We work very closely with the Republic of Korea, our partners and allies, to ensure that because we have a combined command and control system that we close any vulnerabilities there. And we've been working in the past year very hard to develop our cyber capabilities as a team. However, that's an ongoing challenge that we have to stay on top of. North Korea is getting better every day.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Forbes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Madam Secretary, General, Admiral, thank you so much for your service to our country. Thank you for being here today. We've had a couple of milestones in the last few weeks. One, the Japanese have now exceeded the number of planes they've had to scramble against Chinese and Russian planes since the Cold War, as I understand it. We also had the Office of Naval Intelligence print this report, first time they've done it since 2009, talking about a compelling concern about Chinese activity in the disputed waters off the East and South China Sea. I also concur with your comments about sequestration as it relates to national defense, although I really question anyone on this committee or the administration that would suggest that we shouldn't remove defense sequestration unless we can also give the EPA, the IRS, and the GSA all the money they want, or unless we can quench the thirst of every other agency that drinks from every federal trough. To hold defense sequestration hostage against that would be unconscionable. My concern today, as we talk about it, Admiral Locklear, in this committee, we talk about the high-end technological superiority, but I'm also concerned about what we're seeing happen at the lower end. You mentioned, I think correctly, China launched more naval ships than any other country in 2013 and 14, and they expect the same for 2014 and 2015. But I'm also concerned about what they're doing with their Coast Guard. They now have 95 large cutters, 110 small cutters. That's a total of 205. That's 68 ships less than the entire U.S. Navy. And they have more ships in their Coast Guard than Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore have combined. We don't always rate those as naval ships, but you've seen this picture, I'm sure. This picture is of a Chinese Coast Guard vessel. They have labeled on here tugboat number 25. It's painted white. This is one of their amphibious naval ships. It's number 908. It's painted gray. Other than being painted gray and the number on there, there's virtually no difference, I don't think, between these two ships. And that's something that's really concerning me because we don't always measure those. So my question for you today is not the high-end technological superiority, but when we're seeing Iranians in Yemen, we're seeing Russians in the Ukraine, we're seeing Chinese on the Senkakus and the artificial islands are building up. What strategies, concepts, forces, and capabilities do you think we need to counter this kind of gray zone aggression we're seeing in Asia?
Well, thank you, sir. The two pictures you showed, I think, were accurate the way I understand it. The Chinese are engaging in a comprehensive military modernization program that wants to transform not only the PLA into a high-end kind of network-centric military capable of large-scale operations, so we talked about that, but they're also working on the lower end to ensure that they have a maritime security force, which we would equate to a Coast Guard or a fisheries patrol, that by numbers, if you add up all their numbers and everybody else's in Asia's in that category, they exceed everybody else's put together. And I think that they went down that path after they saw what was happening in the Senkakus. They took some of the gray hulls, and we observed them shift those over to be what they would call non-combatants or maritime patrol ships by maybe just changing the color of them. They show no slowdown in the pace of their military modernization, particularly in their Navy, even though their economy has dropped a little bit. They're still on about a 10% increase in 2014. 2015 will be a little bit more. That's the fifth straight year we've seen them do double-digit increases. Of course, their military is, on the high end, prepares for issues around Taiwan and their what they would call their near seas. Their maritime security are put in a position to be able to gain influence, particularly in the South China Sea and in the East China Sea, to further what they consider their national interest there. Now, they doing this in combination with what we have seen to be fairly massive land reclamation in the Spratly Islands and in upgrades to facilities in the Parasail Islands, which are the two regions in the South China Sea. Now, the implications of that for us are that it provides the ability for them to deploy more of these lower-end ships down there, provides the ability to base them down there, to resupply them. It allows them to exert basically greater influence over what's now a contested area. Expanded land features down there also could eventually lead to the deployment of things such as long-range radars, military, and advanced missile systems, and it might be a platform for them if they were ever wanted to establish an air defense, an ADIZ, an air defense zone down there for them to be able to enforce that from. Up to this point in time, the nations around them, the Southeast Asian claimants, have really had little success in formulating an effective response to the PRC actions down there. None of their efforts have slowed the PRC in the South China Sea, and they recognize that stopping the PRC will require a change in the strategic environment down there. So What the types of things that we need to do down there? Well, first, the forces we stay forward. We need to have the types of intelligence and search ISR assets that allow us to maintain our knowledge of what's going on. These are globally stressed because of the things that we're doing in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in Yemen. And many of those assets are similar in type to the ones we would use in that arena. So we need to ensure that we can sense and see what's going on because it allows me to optimally use the forces that we have.
Admiral, my time has expired, but would you mind submitting that to us for the record? It's important that we have it as a committee, and I'm sorry, Mr.
Absolutely,
Chairman, I
sir.
yield back.
I appreciate it. Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Wormuth, and Admiral Locklear, and General Scaparrotti. I want to thank you for coming today, and as the representative from Guam, I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your calling the committee together for taking time to further examine our posture in the Asia-Pacific region. Admiral Locklear, I have a question for you. As the ranking member of the Readiness Subcommittee, I would like to focus on training capabilities in the Asia-Pacific region. Our Marines in Okinawa have degraded training capabilities, and the Army and the Air Force have significant degradation of training capabilities elsewhere in the region. Can you comment on how the department is looking at improving these capabilities? We are moving forward with a live fire training range on Guam. But what about larger training exercises and the need for improving training capabilities in the Northern Marianas Islands? I think that the committee has questions about the cost, and I understand PACOM has a handle on many of these matters. So could you answer that for me?
Well, thanks for the question. It's clear that for us to be as far forward as we are, that we need to have adequate facilities to be able to train and keep our forces ready at the high end. So it requires, I think, a multi-pronged strategy. One is, you mentioned first, is your home is in Guam, is ensuring that the Guam plan that we have for the relocation of the Marines there stays on track, and we really appreciate the support of this committee in doing that as we go forward. And it is on track. As we look at the entire Guam complex and bringing those Marines there, we envision, with the support of the Marianas Islands, Northern Marianas Islands governments up there, to be able to put in place a range up there that allows not only us to keep our Marines that are there ready, but also could bring other nations into play in that strategic part of the world for us to be able to learn together, to train together, and maximize the opportunity for interoperability between our militaries. It's also very important that in Alaska, that we get the range systems in Alaska correct and we maintain those, and that because